Hello everybody and welcome to this Griffith Hack presentation. My name's Adrian Sneary. I'm a principal in our IT and electrical group. I'm based in the Sydney office. I'm joined by Jeremy today.
Yeah, I'm an associate in our Melbourne office and I have a particular interest in fintech and computer science generally.
So today we're going to talk about finding the value of IP in fintech. Now this is a subject that we are particularly excited about. I think the fintech space is very exciting at the moment. We're seeing a lot of new technology. It's a very fast moving space. It's a collaborative space. And it's also one with a lot of IP considerations. So we're seeing from our practice in particular, we're starting to see a growth in the level of engagement we have with fintech companies. So probably at the moment, my portfolio, my client base is probably doing about 40% in the fintech space. So we're getting a lot of experience in this area, and it's a very exciting area of technology. So we're very excited to be here today and to be talking about this. So just briefly, the agenda, what we're going to cover. We're going to initially talk about fintech itself. Fintech is a very broad area, but what we understand fintech to be. We're going to talk about why it's hot right now. So some of the themes that are coming up in the industry. And then we're going to look at what we see, what are our observations, the interactions we've got with our client base, our observations in terms of the market generally. And then we're going to come in to talk about how intellectual property plays a role in the fintech sector. And in particular, we're going to try and help you to understand how to find the IP value in your fintech projects. And then we're going to briefly summarize it at the end.
So fintech as a word has a lot of meanings to a lot of people. The way we see it is that it covers everything from the very front-facing consumer-driven aspects such as payments, apps, and the cloud-based services people use on a day-to-day basis, right down to the underlying technologies such as there's a lot in fintech on security and encryption. Blockchain is a mechanism by which services can be provided. And another big aspect of fintech is the big data available to the various providers. So it's not just that fintech covers a wide range of technology levels, it also has players from a large number of different spaces. So we have the traditional financial institutions, the banks, the trading houses, etc., who are really being forced to innovate as technology is pushing the space ahead. We also are seeing big technology players have come into the fintech space, people like Google and Apple, Amazon, who are bringing their technical expertise, especially in computer science, into this space. And then we're also seeing small medium enterprises sprouting up who are really providing a disruptive factor that's pushing along innovation in this field. So it leads to a question, what's going to happen? And in reality, it seems like there's a lot of ideas as to where people think the space is going to move. Less certainty, but we do know that the banks and government are talking about cashless societies. It could be in 5 years, and the next step could be cardless society, but we just really don't know how it's going to play out. So the really big driver in fintech, and the reason it's happening now, is that the technology has developed to a stage where players at all these different parts of different type of players can really participate, and a lot of that is to do with the massive the massive increase in computer access that's really been provided. For example, with smartphones, most people have access to the internet 24 hours a day, 7 days a week if they desire, and the maturation of the internet. So the internet enables massive amounts of data transportation almost instantly, and allows small companies, especially, access to vast troves of data that they wouldn't have had access to. And the overall effect in fintech is that there is a real race right now to provide better, quicker, and more intuitive offerings, and that's really being pushed by the disruption, and the financial institutions are having to catch up with that.
I think that connectivity generally is playing a big role in what we're seeing in the fintech space. So whether it's the younger generation, the Facebook generation that have grown up with information and access to content at their fingertips, I think what we're starting to see now is that the technology in the fintech space is really becoming closer and closer to the customer, to the fact that we're seeing it every day on the devices that we hold and the screens and other devices that we're interacting with. And I think the connectivity in terms of the sort of the expectations and the demands of consumers here is also a big factor in driving the tech and driving the thinking forwards. And it's also helping a lot of some of the other brands who are used to delivering content and devices in this way to sort of find their way into the space. And I guess we're going to talk a bit about that in a second with collaborations.
So what we're seeing in the space is there is real collaboration between the large existing players and the small, medium enterprises who are really pushing the innovation of new ideas. And it's quite a sensible collaboration in the sense that the small companies, the startups, are able to really test out new theories quite quickly and with a lot of agility, because they're not tied down to their existing brand, that there's not necessarily the same level of worry about making sure that you don't upset your existing base. They can really move they can really test out things quite quickly. But what they don't have is they don't have the access to the massive customer bases, the information about those customers that the big financial institutions have. And they don't have the resources to take the theory and really push it into becoming a large, new product, really. So it's quite a good space for collaboration, but collaboration itself creates its own problems.
I think with collaboration, so if you look at the fintech sector, what's being brought into the space and what's being brought into the products and services, there's a whole number of factors coming into things. So there's the existing financial infrastructure. So there's the idea, if you look at payment in particular, that payments, I hold my cash and my money in a bank, and ultimately that cash is moved from one place to another when I buy something or when I transfer that. So that brings the banks into play, and that old existing infrastructure. On top of that, the technology now. So we talk about the devices and the way that consumers are starting to interact with financial products. So all of a sudden, you're starting to bring in the technology there, which is coming in from technology companies. You're bringing in new ideas around what products might look like, particularly in a sort of software-driven environment as well. So there we're seeing that's really where a lot of sort of young startup companies can contribute, because probably the overheads on putting initial ideas around software, those sort of products together, can be pulled together in quite a nimble way. And then the other side to all of this as well, with all of this movement of finance information and customer data and all this really, this information that all of us hold as very sensitive and very personal, is the security aspects to all of this as well. So obviously security has always played a very big part in financial transactions and financial infrastructure, but now we're trying to move outside of this, and we're trying to build products and devices which enable us to interact with each other in sort of handheld devices and in other ways, security is becoming really more and more important there as well.
Yeah, it's very important that only the right people have the access to this very sensitive data, and it's also about knowing who the right people are. I think when you're collaborating, you've got to, if you're giving up personal information about clients, even if it's anonymized, you need to make sure that the person you're partnering with is going to take it as seriously as you do. And so collaborations, though, they're very good for the parties involved. Everyone's able to bring their own strengths, and it really minimizes the weaknesses. It's got to be done very carefully so that the right people are dealing with the right information the right way.
So these are some of the themes that that stand out from this particular sector in the fintech environment. Now we've got a couple of examples here. We could put many examples of different fintech projects, but we're just going to talk about a couple here.
So the first one, which I think is quite an interesting example of kind of intentional collaboration between a variety of players, and it's quite interesting for us because in the Australian market is the so-called new payments platform, which has really came out of discussions between the banks, the governments, and some other players, and we're talking about the big four banks, who wanted to really provide a platform from which they could develop new products in payments. So the idea is that if all these players are working together, they're able to create a platform from the underlying hardware, the protocols about how data is transferred from point A to point B, protocols as to how payments are managed. They got together and defined this, and the outcome has been a new platform whereby payments can be basically made in real time, rather than waiting one night or 3 nights for a payment to clear. If you want to transfer from bank A to bank B, and now it will clear in a matter of minutes. So, of course, considering the banks all have their own systems, this required a lot of collaboration, a lot of working together, standardizations of protocols, how messages sent from bank A to bank B had to be standardized. So this has happened over the last 5 or 6 years or so, and just very recently come into play. I've experienced it already, and payments are happening very quickly. But the really interesting thing about it is they didn't want to just create a platform for payments. I mean, that's very useful, but in itself, it's a little bit of a dead end. What they've added to it is this idea of overlay services, where they've purposely created this platform to enable third parties to build products on top of it, utilizing it, but in a way that no one necessarily has really predicted. So the first overlay really is just payments between banking institutions. But what's really expected is that third parties, small startups are going to grab onto this and really push ahead. Now, it does create a question, does innovation in this area, is it so specific to Australia that not going to be thinking about the rest of the world? I don't think it is. I think the platform might be specific to Australia, but the products that are going to come out of it are going to have, well, at least some of them, a universal application.
I mean, certainly the problem or the idea behind the new payments platform of fast real-time transfer of funds is a global.
Yeah, exactly. And there's other aspects. They've improved the messaging. So I don't know if you remember sending money to your friends or to another company, you wanted to add in a description of the transaction. If you tried anything more fancy than a word or two, you got an error message popping up. They've opened it up. It's much longer descriptions with more character availability. So that in itself was potentially going to enable third parties to provide a much higher level of service. And the other example we had was Adrian's a bit of a special.
Yeah. So the other, I mean, so we're in March 2018 at the moment, and blockchain is very much a buzzword. We've just been through a lot of media attention, which has been provided onto blockchain over the past, particularly sort of 6 to 9 months. And the interest and the publicity has really been brought around this due to Bitcoin and the other cryptocurrency markets, where we've seen huge run-ups on price, and then movement downturn on price, and then just generally a lot of conversation around blockchain. So what's going on at the moment with blockchain from where we stand? There are some blockchains which have already been created. So like the blockchain network, or the Bitcoin blockchain rather, which is Bitcoin's there to facilitate basically financial or transactions of Bitcoin. Other blockchains have been created, like the Ethereum blockchain, which also covers smart contracts and allows more functionality to come in. And new blockchains are being created all the time now with different benefits, being specifically built to address some of the problems with the previous blockchains, particularly around sort of cost of transactions and speed of transactions as well. But when you move away from the narrative around Bitcoin and the narrative around cryptocurrencies, and you look at the technology itself, you find that the technology, which is fundamentally a distributed ledger, so transaction occurs between two parties, and that a record of that transaction is maintained, and instead of being maintained in a single centralized spot, it's distributed within a blockchain, so there are many recordings of that particular transaction. And most of these blockchains are public as well, so they're public and decentralized. There's a huge amount of global investment at the moment in blockchain. If we look at our big four banks in Australia, each of those big four has got an ongoing development project around blockchain as well. And there's applications in all sorts of areas like payments, infrastructure transactions, and digital ID management is something as well. So the underlying technology here is becoming more and more certainly researched and developed, and we're starting to get to a phase now where we're starting to see adoption of this within particular market sectors and for particular applications. So a good example here for Australia is the partnership between the ASX, which is our stock exchange, and Digital Asset Holdings, who's a New York startup company. So they're a New York startup, but they've got a very high credential team with some influence there from JP Morgan as well. And Digital Asset Holdings are working with the ASX at the moment to create a settlement platform for the stock exchange. And that's exciting for us in Australia because it's the first stock exchange in the world that has looked to implement blockchain as part of their settlement infrastructure.
So we had some data that we thought we'd put up there just to show, I suppose, the variety of players who are innovating in blockchain. And I know Adrian.
Yeah, I don't think we particularly want to dwell on this, but we're talking about we just mentioned blockchain as an example there about the development of this particular technology, and we can see here we've just done a quick snapshot of who's filing patent applications around blockchain, and we can see here that a lot of the big there's financial institutions that are filing, and there's other technology companies as well. If you look at IBM in there. In particular, Accenture, and then you can see the sort of the financial sector coming in around MasterCard and some of the banks as well. So again, a lot of interest in this space. So I guess just to really summarise where we've got to so far. Now, the introduction that we've just given on FinTech is obviously very quick. It's very high level. We've only touched on a couple of examples of particular technology there and projects where we could have looked at many or hundreds and different collaborations as well. But there's, from our perspective, looking in or being sort of looking in from the outside in terms of what's going on in some of these partnerships, but also working closely with our FinTech communities that we're involved with, there are some clear themes and observations that we're seeing in relation to this sector. So I guess the first one is the innovation. There's significant innovation in this space at the moment. It's moving very quickly. It's moving quickly. It's technology based, and it's also you can say that it's consumer focused as well. Very much focused on delivering customers products that they can interact with.
Yeah. Consumers these days are very knowledgeable about new developments and are very willing to move from one company to another if they perceive a better offering, and that's a massive driver. And the innovation is staying at the head of that curve, that trend of new products and better offerings.
Yeah. So innovation is a a clear theme that we see. Disruption is another one. Now, we talked a lot about previously we talked about the different companies that are coming into this space and the different components that they're bringing. What's happening at the moment is that the financial sector is being disrupted. We're seeing new products and services coming in and different types of companies that are bringing those into the financial space. So disruption is clearly another theme that we're seeing. Yeah. And I guess another one that we're seeing very clearly is collaboration. Again, this comes from, and this is obviously tied into some extent to disruption as well, the way that the products are being developed here, the different technologies, the different skill sets that are being brought to really deliver these products mean that this is a very collaborative working environment at the moment. And then the other thing that we're seeing, which is I guess on the tech side is also quite interesting as well, is that we're starting to see some real regional hubs set up. I think probably the biggest regional hub internationally is London. There's a very big fintech community in London. New York's another very fintech focused location. And then within Asia, we're seeing fintech sort of hubs pop up within Hong Kong and Singapore. And actually those governments are looking at things and saying, actually, how can we attract fintech and innovation into our communities, into our countries? And that's something that's very interesting. And obviously with us sitting in Australia here, we're starting to see interest. There's been a report published recently, which was a report for the Committee of Sydney.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Which is focused on Sydney as a fintech hub and then Australia more widely as a fintech hub as well. So, even within Australia now, we're starting to see a real focus on saying, what can we do to bring fintech innovation, fintech companies, fintech revenue into Australia?
Yeah, and how can we promote new companies how can we help them get their ideas out in a way that will be successful for those small companies? Because I think in Australia we've got the big four banks, then we don't have much, and then we've got a lot of startups, and I think there's recognition with the various incubators and the like that startups need the support. It's just whether we see that they're getting enough support is another issue, but it's definitely a focus of the government.
Yeah, we are starting to see these incubators pop up. So we've put some examples there. Stone and Chalk and Tyro are examples of incubators, basically environments where companies who are interested in the same sector can sit and work together. And then Fintech Australia as well, which is effectively a lobbying group and a body that's really come together to try to focus on some of the interests for fintech companies within Australia in order to deliver this. So with all of this going on, one thing, so us as IP consultants, as IP experts, one thing that really sticks out to us is that there's very little discussion about the management of intellectual assets. Yeah. So in an environment where there is significant, innovation, disruption, collaboration, we're seeing huge business opportunities and also huge business risks, with a focus in particular around tech. We're not seeing a high-profile discussion at the moment around intellectual assets, and particularly when you start looking at, like we mentioned, the Committee of Sydney report, other international reports as well, which are put together around fintech. There are discussions around IP generally, and there certainly is when we look at some of the IP activity from the on the blockchain filings that we looked at before. But there's not a high profile discussion around that. Is to say, look, with all of this going on, how is intellectual property relevant in order to make sure that we're delivering against those business opportunities and that we're managing those business risks?
Remembering as well that there are some players in the space who are very used to dealing with their intellectual assets, and especially the technology companies, that are the big ones that are coming in, they will internally talk about their intellectual assets. So if you're a company entering the fintech space, you've got to be aware that the big players have their strategies, and what we think there should be more discussion of, if you are a player coming into the space, is how important are your intellectual assets to you, because they are important to your competitors.
Well, there's no doubt about it. So this is a competitive environment. You know, we've talked about that. There's going to be a lot of competition in this space. Yeah. All right. So as a company, as getting involved with the project, you need to look at this and say, what are you doing to win? Exactly. What are you going to do to optimize your opportunities and to mitigate your risks? You know, can we go back, Jeremy, to that blockchain? So what we're seeing here is that, you know, certain companies have actually filed patents around blockchain. Again, this is just one part of fintech and one particular example, but you can see here that we've got patent filings in this particular space. Now, what you can be sure of is that, you know, the companies up here are sophisticated companies, right? They're serious about their intellectual property. They will be having conversations internally around IP, and they will have a very clear IP strategy. But this patent filing numbers that we see here is just a part of their IP strategy, right? And their IP strategy is just a small part of their business strategy. So what we're seeing here is that, you know, these blockchain patents that we've got, the slide that we're looking at here, isn't the extent of their IP strategy to file patents. This will form a part of something else that they're doing. In order to deliver on what they want to deliver, they will be filing patents. Alongside the patents, they'll be taking certain actions inside. They'll be, you know, working these in particular ways, and this all forms part of their wider business strategy. And and this is what happens when you work with sophisticated companies that really approach intellectual property in this way. Companies that don't, and that just work through without having a real understanding of how intellectual property plays into what it is that they're doing, just won't compete. They will get smoked in this in competitive environment like this. You know, you have to be very clear about what it is.
It's the strategic thinking, and I think that's probably a good time to jump into the next section.
Yeah. So the good news is that we're now going to talk you through how we approach that discussion and how we advocate, you know, working with our clients and, you know, for you as businesses to think about what it is that you're doing in terms of your business, your project, your products, and, you know, bring the intellectual property discussion into that.
And so we'll jump to. So it starts at the business level, and those big, you know, those savvy companies that we had on the slide earlier, they don't start the discussion saying, what intellectual property do we have and what do we do with it? They start the discussion at how are we going to take our business forward? And that, I mean, this is true for any business strategy, and intellectual property forms a part of it, and intellectual assets more broadly. So it's about looking at your business, what your opportunities are, and what the risks are associated with those opportunities.
Yeah, I think so. That's right, Jeremy. So what we have a lot of clients obviously come in with great ideas, with ideas around what they want to protect from a patent perspective, from a branding perspective, and, you know, the way that we approach that conversation is always to say, right, let's park that thought for a minute, but let's take a step back and let's understand what's going on a business level. You know, so in fact, if you go down, Jeremy, probably onto the next slide. Yeah, this is really what we're trying to. This is where the conversation starts. What are we trying to achieve from a business perspective? Why are we investing in this product or relationship? What is it about this that is going to drive revenue? What are we hoping to achieve? What is it about this that's going to allow us to win from a business perspective? What will winning look like? What will keep us ahead of the competition? And what does the business need to deliver to succeed? So and these are conversations that any business will have at the outset of any project or any new business opportunity or any potential partnership opportunity. So this is really taking a step back to say, right, let's see the bigger picture. What is it that your particular business is trying to achieve here? And then we start from that and we come at it from that perspective. And then we move into starting to look at, okay, so what are the market opportunities that you're trying to access, that you're starting to exploit there, and what are the market risks? And again, we're very much on a business level. So if you come down again, Jeremy, opportunities and risks. So we've thrown a few up here on the screen. These are obviously just examples of different market opportunities, different market risks that might be associated with your particular product or business. Now, you may have 5 or 6. It may be very clear that you've got one particular opportunity or one particular risk. But what is it that's going to help you to win? Is it your speed to market? Just looking at some of the opportunities here on the left-hand side. Is it the fact that you've got a fantastic brand and a super reputation that when people see your products in a particular space, then your customer base is going to come on board and just go with that existing customer base? Is it the tech that you're building? Yeah. Is it that's going to help you to win? Is the tech that you're building going to be so great that everybody's just got to have it? Is it data and the information that you've got that's going to allow you to really exploit that market opportunity? What are the market risks as well? Are you moving into a space where there's a lot of existing technology already out there that you're either going to come very close to or that you're going to need access to? There are open source licensing obligations here. This is something that comes up a lot in the software space, which is around open source. So open source licensing is all around where parties build software in particular, sort of coding, or even tech, and say that we're going to open this up and let other people use this. But there's normally obligations associated with that. So be very careful if you're moving to a space where you're trying to lift modules or code from something that you understand to be open source. Have a look at those licensing obligations.
And they are licensing obligations. The intellectual property really is still owned by the developer of the open source software. What they've said is, I'll give you a license to use it however you like, except within certain restrictions. And a lot of the time the restrictions are, if you improve on the code, then you have to open up the improvement just as the base has been opened up. And so the licenses are freely available. They're usually specified with the open source software. It's just a case of being familiar with what they put on you when it comes to what you've developed.
Yeah, we can get a little bit sidetracked, I guess, on open source obligations here, but it's particularly relevant in the fintech space because there's so much there's quite a lot of software driving this stuff. So,
but at the same time, it's a risk because if your advantage lies in exclusivity, for example, then it's going to be something you're going to have to consider.
Yeah. So just coming back, I'm just going to. Can't move. Move back a couple of slides. So coming back to again, how do we approach this IP discussion? So as we said, we start off with the conversation on the business level. We really understand what it is that we're trying to achieve, what's driving the revenue, why are we thinking of getting involved with this partnership, what's the outcome that we want, and then moving from that into the market opportunities and the market risks. And this is where, when we look at this, we can start to say, right, how does intellectual property play a role in what it is you're trying to achieve? How can intellectual property help you to exploit those opportunities and mitigate those risks? What is it that we need to be aware of? And this conversation is no different from the way that in business, when you're looking at business opportunities, you're looking at projects, you're looking at products, you look at your regulatory requirements, you look at your privacy requirements, you look at the profit and loss and the cost of production, tax implications. All these other considerations that always form part of that risk matrix when you're building a product or you're building a business. And what we are really driving at here is that the consideration around intellectual property has to form part of that discussion as well.
Yeah.
And it has to find its way into that matrix of opportunities and risks.
And a lot of that is because fintech is a very, very highly technology innovation driven sector. And so clearly your intellectual property is going to be important, and you have to decide how it's going to form part of your strategy. And I think, as we'll go into, we're not advocating filing a patent for every single idea you come up with, or a trademark for every possible variation of your brand. What we're saying is the decisions you make need to be positive decisions. They have to be decisions where you are taking an active step to manage your intellectual assets.
Yeah, this is really where we get to here now. Yeah. Is that we look at and that's why we're here as IP consultants, as patent attorneys, and trademark attorneys, and IP lawyers. Is that we help businesses with these conversations to identify where there's opportunities and where there's risks. And this discussion is very much around value-based opportunities and value-based risks. And then once we identify those as part of that IP strategy, we make positive decisions to say, right, this is what we're going to do, and this is why we're going to do it. And then we look at implementation to make sure that those decisions get implemented throughout the project and that they get maintained. So we're just going to, unless you've got anything else to say on that one.
I think it's a useful time to go to some of our examples.
Yeah, so we talked a bit before about opportunities and risks, and we sort of put some examples up here. What we've done, we thought perhaps the best way to sort of discuss these from an IP perspective in the time that we've got left is just to highlight a few of these and just have a discussion around, okay, how might we handle this from an IP perspective? What could an IP strategy look like if you've got a particular market opportunity or risk? So the first one that we pulled up is exclusivity. So you've got a new product line coming out, you're in the fintech space, and you're saying, like, this is going to work for me in terms of delivering against my business model, but really only if I'm the only one that can offer this within the marketplace. If other competitors start to offer this particular product, then that's going to start eating into my market share. I'm not coming at this with a win based off my existing customer base or branding, but I can win on this particular project if I've got exclusivity.
And a lot of the time this will apply where the underlying idea behind the product is easily reverse engineerable. Once the idea is known, people can implement it at relatively low cost to entry. So in that case, you're going to have competitors fairly quickly unless you manage your exclusive position in the market. And so there's different ways to achieve that. One of the obvious ones that Adrian and I are very familiar with is, of course, patents. They'll give you a monopoly in a particular technology area, but they'll only help you if the base is a technological improvement. If your idea is more of a new business method or the like, then maybe the patent's not going to be the right thing for you. And in fact, a patent could be bad, because a patent, you end up having to disclose to the world what your idea is. So that we may have if that comes up, there'll be another discussion. For example, how do you keep your idea a secret for basically as long as possible?
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously this is one that comes up a lot for us as patent attorneys. Clients come in and say, right, I've come up with this super idea. I want to protect this with a patent or patent application. And the reason that I want to do that is because I want to be able to keep everybody else out of the market, so I can have a free run. And that's great. I mean, if you look at what patents are there for, yes, they are there for that very purpose. But when you look at that, particularly when we talk around patents, if you're going to go that route, then we know that if you file a patent application and you want to proceed with that, it's going to be published, and the patent describes the way the system works. So everybody in the world is going to be able to see how your system works if they can't reverse engineer it, for example, if they couldn't find it out otherwise. And then you're only going to get to that point of having that monopoly in a useful way if you get the patent granted, and you get the patent granted in a useful form that actually protects what it is that you're wanting to do. So patents give a good opportunity for exclusivity, but only in particular situations. When we have clients that look at that and say, okay, well, how else can we approach this in the market, Adrian? So you might say, well, okay, what is it about your product that you actually want to be able to offer exclusively?
Yeah.
And it's the fact that it works in a particular way that allows you to have improved results or faster results. So the next conversation then comes into, well, is it reverse engineerable? Do we need to disclose the fact that that it works in a particular way? Are trade secrets an option there? Is there, I'm trying to think if there's another way that we can do that, so we can cover it with patents, with trade secrets. Is there another way to make it reverse engineerable?
And I guess there are, I mean, in the space of exclusivity, those two tend to be the go-tos, but there's other situations that sometimes copyright will be actually sufficient if the way it's presented on the phone and the web browser really provides the benefit, then we may be able to rely on copyright. But in reality, it tends to be trade secrets and patents, which
the other way you can manage it is through commercial engagement as well. So you might say that look, we're building this particular product, and we want to partner with an exclusive partner who may, for example, have the branding and the reputation that can really win in the marketplace. So actually, it changes your market opportunity there because you're actually approaching it from a different route. So that's where sort of partnerships can come in as well. So we try and get creative then around trying to support, okay, where there's opportunities to deliver that in the sort of the existing obvious ways, but also are there other ways that we can get to the same outcome and use the IP in a different way?
The other question with the exclusivity is it may be you may only need exclusivity for a certain period of time to really achieve what the business strategy is, and that might be an example where in 5 years' time you don't expect the technology may have developed so much that you've really got the benefit if you've had the exclusivity for a small period of time. That's another thing that can be managed strategically based on who you interact with, who you collaborate with, etc.
Yeah. Same as and jurisdictionally as well.
Yeah.
Where do you want the exclusivity? What we're trying to get across in this conversation is that there's not just one way to deliver a particular business opportunity. That's what it is that we're really trying to get across here, and to say that actually, there's maybe different ways that you can get to the same endpoint, but what you want to do is be able to get there in a way that best protects your intellectual assets. So as we were saying before, if publishing gives you a potential problem, and then you're saying, right, I'm going to bank on getting the patent granted versus keeping it trade secret, you just need to be aware of that. So there's options there and opportunities there to manage in particular ways.
So I think it's worth going on to the next one. So in fintech, another key aspect in fintech really is branding and reputation, and a lot of that is to do with the fact that you are dealing with people's financial information a lot of the time, and that's something that you have to do right, because if you do wrong, you'll end up, it's going to be well known very quickly that you did something wrong. So if there's if there's an information leak, or if there was a hack, or if there's just simple mismanagement, then your brand and reputation is going to suffer. On the flip side to that, there are entities out there that have an amazing reputation, And however you feel about the Australian banking institutions, for example, everyone feels like their money is safe with those institutions. Those institutions, therefore, might be a little bit wary about giving data away when they do not have 100% control on that data. So if you're going to rely on branding, it has to be done in a way that anyone you're collaborating with, anyone that you're working with, understands the importance of it.
And this is a particularly important example for partnerships.
Yeah.
Where, like in any partnership or in any business arrangement or any kind of negotiation, you look at things and say, what am I trying to achieve? Where's my risk and where's my leverage? Right? And actually, what is really important to me? And the reason that we put the branding and reputation up here is that it comes back to sort of the security aspect of what we were talking about before. We've got banking environments or banking institutions which we know, regardless of what public think of them, they do trust them, right? They trust them. You trust that your money is safe at that bank, and you're unlikely to log in one morning on your account and find that you
Not there.
lost your funds. So trust is very important, and reputational and brand is absolutely paramount around there. So how does that work when you're working with a small fintech company, who's bringing some technology here, and you're saying, right, how do I need to manage my reputation around this? What do I need to make sure is in place in this agreement to make sure that my branding is going to be intact and that the other party is maintaining my information or my intellectual property in the absolutely secure way that we want them to. So again, when we talk about intellectual property and IP, we're not just talking about patents, trademarks, copyright here. You have to look at what those institutions and partners are bringing to the table. So actually, where's the value in that? And if the value is in reputation, if the value is in customer information, this is all intellectual assets.
Yeah.
And it's so important that these things are managed carefully and correctly. But one last one that we've put up here, which is one that probably doesn't get talked about too much, but I suspect
enough, I don't think.
No, maybe not enough, but certainly one that comes up a lot in fast-moving, innovative sort of sectors and technology areas is the relevance of the team. Is that, again, when you look at it and say, what is it that's bringing this market opportunity? Actually, is it the people that you've got? And what is it about the people that are really bringing this opportunity? I've back from my M&A days, when I look at the way that transactions used to work, particularly transactions with very small businesses, you look at those and think, what is it that's giving that small business at the moment that advantage? What is it that's allowing them to build product, to think laterally, to really develop the product, to bring things out? Often it's the team itself, it's the environment that they're working in, it's the goals that they're working towards, and the belief that they've got within what it is that they're doing and what it is that they're trying to achieve. And there's a lot of that in the whole blockchain space at the outset. If you look at the sort of the narrative and the early discussions around Bitcoin. So again, if your intellectual property is in your team, and it's that's giving you the advantage, what are you doing to secure that team? What are you doing to make sure that group of people is going to continue to deliver, is going to continue to operate in the way that's going to keep your product ahead of the market?
And what's the contingency if you lose a team member? Do you have that information adequately recorded? Do you have adequate controls in place that they aren't able to immediately compete with you? Really, in fintech, it is driven a lot by clever people being clever, and those you need to make sure that it's managed, that you understand what people know, who knows what, and that you're sure that someone leaving, A, that you're trying your hardest to avoid it happening, but B, if it does happen, that you're able to cover it as smoothly as possible.
And I think that comes into know-how as well. So if you look at the other opportunities here, I don't know whether this marker is going to come up on the slides here, but if you look at know-how around the tech, again, really important that you're managing your key workers carefully. So again, look, what we're trying to really illustrate here is that there's a number of ways that you can come at the intellectual property conversation, but what we're trying to demonstrate is how important it is to have the IP discussion across all industries. But from what we're seeing at the moment in fintech, with the fast-moving tech, the collaborations, the disruption, with all of this going on, the discussion around IP, the risks and the opportunities really do form a part of that business opportunity and risk matrix.
Has to form just part of the discussion early, because it's an industry that's moving so quickly. If you're having the discussion after 12 months, even maybe in less time after really starting out on the business cycle, it could be too late. It's just so quick. What's a new innovative product today is old hat in a few months' time.
Yeah, and again, this is something that we see a lot with a lot of clients that come forward and say, okay, we've got this happening, or this has happened. Is there anything we can do to try and undo this, to try and protect ourselves? And there often are steps that we can take to try and repair some of the damage that may have already been done. But we really can't iterate enough the importance of having these conversations early on as part of your project planning discussion. So look, just to summarise now what we've covered, it's been a bit of a whistle-stop discussion through fintech and sort of some of the IP considerations that we really are trying to promote and we're trying to get people to think about here. Just very high level, as we've said, on the technology area itself and the fintech sector, rapidly developing tech area, a lot of change in market dynamics, and considerable market opportunities and market risks. Our observation from where we sit is that while IP, intellectual property, is very important, we don't see a sort of high-profile, visible IP discussion around the community generally. And we see this is particularly relevant when you start looking at, I guess, incubators and the idea of how do we drive fintech community or other communities in particular sectors and particular locations. So we were talking before about some of the Australian initiatives around Committee for Sydney, again the Australian 2030 report, which is all around, again, how do we drive innovation towards the year 2030 within Australia. And we're really promoting that we have that IP conversation and we start that from a business perspective. This isn't a sales pitch for filing patents or for filing trademarks. This is really is a sort of a driver to have the conversation around IP, to understand how you can use intellectual property to really help you make the most of those opportunities that you've got and to mitigate your risks. And then once you've had that conversation, whether you've built your IP strategy, execute the plan, have a clear execution strategy, and make sure that plan gets revisited. Because things change from time to time. Products evolve, markets evolve, business opportunities change. So make sure that, again, you're not sitting there in 5 years running the same strategy, which is now completely out of date because dynamics have changed. So that wraps up what we really wanted to cover today. Okay, so sorry, last slide here.
Yeah, well, just
got our contact details here. Look, we're really trying to drive this dialogue. We've given a couple of sessions externally here. We've had some really lively discussions and debate around the approach to intellectual property within fintech. It's something that Jeremy and I in particular are very passionate about, and our wider team is again very much involved with what we're doing, and we're seeing a big uptake on this from Griffith Hack. So please do feel free to get in touch with us with any questions, or if you just want to join in the discussion and take things forward. Yeah. So thanks very much. We're going to leave it there.